All four of the presentations will start with a song in the Afrobeats genre, and then I'll explain the connection of the song to the presentation. Now, you might be thinking, what does that song have to do with cultural responsiveness? So I'll explain. Last month, our song was Essence by Wizkid, and this month it is Art by Tyla. Tyla is an artist that was born and raised in Johannesburg, South Africa, and her musical style is characterized by a fusion of pop and amapiano. And if you've never heard of amapiano, it is a South African music genre taken from the word for pianos and house music and like a little bit of like electronic dance music, jazz, soul, and lounge music. And I just became acquainted to this music. I love Afro beats, but I just became acquainted with amapiano and like South African Afro beats because I visited South Africa for spring break earlier this year. And I had a couple of students. They were so excited for me to go. They made me a playlist because they love that genre of music. And then I've just been on it since then. So what does this song mean? As you can hear, it was a little spicy. And so this song actually explores desire and power dynamics. And she is essentially talking about herself being a work of art and using her desirability to gain control within her relationship. And so today we're going to be learning about cultural responsiveness, which is a practical way of centering culture within all aspects of therapy. And I'm going to be using an acronym ART, A-R-T, to provide you with some practical strategies for culturally responsive assessment and treatment. And that'll be the last portion of our presentation today. Please take a moment to review my land acknowledgement here, as well as acknowledge the land that you are on currently in recognition of Indigenous people, their contributions, their labor, the impact of colonization on their livelihood, and the grave injustices inflicted on them. For my disclosures, my financial disclosures, I receive a salary as a visiting associate clinical professor at Northeastern University, Charlotte, and I am receiving an honorarium for this webinar. My non-financial disclosures, I am a board member of the National Black Association of Speech, Language, and Hearing and member of the ASHA SIG 14 Special Interest Group. A little bit about me, just a little. I'm from Savannah, Georgia, and I currently live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I've been here for a couple of months now and really loving it. I was actually born in Fayetteville, North Carolina, so this is kind of a coming back home, if you will. And I was a school-based SLP for about 6.5 years in Atlanta and Houston, Texas. And I would say that was the foreground in my beginning of my journey in culturally responsive practices, because I came out of graduate school. I went to grad school at Indiana University, Bloomington, plopped down in Atlanta, Georgia, and realized, oh my goodness, I am not prepared and I need to learn some culturally responsive practices ASAP, although I didn't even know it really had a name. I didn't know any of that. So most of my time in the schools was an exploration of that. And so as far as my content matter expertise, I taught a culturally responsive practices graduate course for 3 years. At the master's level, I'm about to be teaching a course at the doctoral level in that area. And I've done a variety of guest lectures on culturally responsive practices, whether it be assessment, treatment. So this is one of my favorite areas to talk about. I currently have an article in press that I wrote with my colleague, friend, Dr. Megan Mahold. I don't know, it's going to come out any day now. I just did the copy edits, but we are talking about cultural humility, cultural responsiveness, and cultural flexibility in an article called The Culture Flex. And on the right here is a picture of I would do a podcast in my culturally responsive practices graduate course called the For the Culture podcast. It was influenced by the Migos, the rap group. And we would talk about all things cultural responsiveness every week. So I just included that. I really miss teaching that class. In the spirit of self-reflexivity, I would like to begin with my positionality. I am a dark-skinned Black American cisgender heterosexual Christian woman, a descendant of enslaved African people. I have earned a doctorate, middle class, non-disabled, monolingual, bidialectal, a speaker of African American English. I'm a speech language practitioner, also a psychologist and professor. And I am a daughter, I am a sister, I am a friend. My core values are faith, love, justice, and hope. Our learning objectives for today, first, we are going to define culturally responsive and culturally sustaining practices. Then we are going to briefly interrogate personal, structural, and institutional threats to inclusion and equity in regard to cultural responsiveness. And finally, you will be able to list 5 practical strategies for culturally responsive assessment and treatment. So for our flow today, we're going to start with a brief grounding in mindfulness just to get us all on the same page of talking about this topic. Then we'll go through working definitions, talk about some of the threats to equity and inclusion. Really, there's just a time to reflect on your own practices. And then I will give you some strategies to take with you. And really, I mean, we can call them strategies, maybe considerations, I don't know. But things to think about. Cultural responsiveness is a journey. And so this is only going to be a seed. A 1-hour presentation on cultural responsiveness is only going to be a little tiny seed planted. And the goal is for you to maybe take with you some new terminology or maybe some ideas or maybe just some reflecting on your own practices today and try to continue to grow and make a commitment to more learning after this. Grounding is a mindfulness exercise, and we're going to use that to center ourselves on the topic of cultural responsiveness. Last time I used the video, this time I'm going to use a quote. This quote is from James Baldwin, one of my favorites. And James Baldwin was a prominent American writer, civil rights movement leader. And this quote is on the rarity of truth. So this is what we are going to reflect on. Sometimes you hear a person speak the truth and you know that they are speaking the truth, but you also know that they have not heard themselves, do not know what they have said, do not know that they have revealed much more than they have said. This may be why the truth remains, on the whole, so rare. So I want you to reflect on the extent that true self-aware communication is rare. James Baldwin's quote speaks to a layer of truth in our communication, in that many times when we express ourselves, we express what we intended to express, but we also sometimes express unconscious things that we weren't even aware of. And a lot of times it could be unexamined assumptions, biases, maybe a little bit about our insecurities, our privilege. And Baldwin suggests that self-revelation is often unnoticed by the speaker, so you don't really notice, making true self-aware communication a rare occurrence. So, on a personal level, how often do you engage in self-reflection to develop your own cultural self-awareness. Another way I can put that is reflect on how often you might consider yourself a cultural being. Do you consider yourself a cultural being? Do you think about your own culture and who you are and reflect on your potential biases, your identities, your experiences, values, beliefs? So my last question I want to pose to you, and anyone can feel free to answer or provide a comment, observation if you would like to. How do you think Baldwin's idea of hearing oneself and recognizing the truths we unconsciously communicate align with the need for self-awareness in culturally responsive practice? That's a big question. Another way I could say that is, do you even see the connection between self-awareness and culturally responsive practice? Do you think you need to be self-aware to be culturally responsive or not? To what extent?
But I would say yes, because it helps us to identify what shows up when we're working with families.
Mm,
And if we are not recognizing the possible biases that we have and how that plays into how we provide therapy and intervention and how that might impact the families, whether it's positive or negative, then or and how it might impact families positive or negatively. And then it also allows us to kind of like set aside those biases, not set aside as in like just like ignore them, but to allow us to really listen to what the family wants and need for, and like what they want for their child. And so just being able to reflect on who we are and what role we play, but also what roles, the most important role that the parent plays whenever we are practicing, I guess I would say.
absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And it's so true. The ability to be self-aware is going to be directly aligned with the way that you interact with your clients and the extent to which you're able to build that rapport to really get an understanding of what their needs are. You kind of have to be able to kind of read between the lines and hear what someone is saying without them saying it.
To kind of build upon what was said, you have to, and just like you showed up and stated who you are and what your values are, it's important for us to all to understand where we're coming from, what our perspectives are, what our values are. Um, I do have to do that a lot in the organizing work I do. We do a lot of reflection, critique, analyzing history and the present and understanding where we are in the moment. So we use that history to understand where we are in the moment to move forward. Sankofa is what that's called as
Yeah.
well. Um, and it also centers us and allows us to know when um, setting up boundaries for our own beliefs and principles and identities. Also being mindful of how we show up and interact with others and how those power dynamics play as well.
Mhm. Mhm. I like that you brought up power dynamics too, because it's not only thinking of ourselves at an individual level, but then also you want to think of yourself and your platform and your privilege and seeing yourself as a part of a profession, being able to really visualize power dynamics that are inherent in our relationships. They're inherent in teacher-student relationships, doctor, patient, clinician, client, they are inherent. in our relationships. So we have to be self-aware to not only know who we are as cultural beings and what we're bringing in with our values and our beliefs and our education and what we feel like is expertise, and then be able to look at that and say, hey, I can see some power dynamics here. And if cultural responsiveness is about not only bringing in someone's culture, but centering their culture as your lens, as your foundation for therapy, then you have to look at those power imbalances to really see the extent to which you're able to do that. So, what I love about cultural responsiveness, in my opinion, it is a practical way. There's so many actions that you can take to enact cultural humility, and cultural humility is a personal orientation, but it's also at interpersonal and institutional levels as well. So I'm going to start with our working definitions, and thank you for everyone who shared. I really appreciate you bringing your voice into the space here tonight. I'm going to share some working definitions around cultural responsiveness and culturally sustaining practices, which is kind of like our newer term. But I want to start with a review around cultural humility. So just in case you did not make it to the last webinar, there is a link that you could see that later on. But just a reminder, cultural humility, the 4 pillars of cultural humility: 1, lifelong learning and a lifelong process of critical self-reflection or critical self-evaluation or self-critique, meaning you are constantly thinking about yourself as a cultural being. You're not centering yourself. You are reflecting on your identities, your privileges, your biases, the way you were raised, your beliefs, your values. What are your limits? You're thinking about areas that discomfort and using that as a kind of like a thermometer to see where you are and where you can, areas where you might need to grow. So that self-reflection is like breathing in terms of cultural humility. Then the next pillar of cultural humility is redressing power imbalances in the patient-provider dynamic, or in our case, the clinician-client dynamic. So thinking about, wow, there are power imbalances inherent. Wow, they said they don't have any questions, but that doesn't really mean they don't have any questions. Or I said, what did you want me to do? What do you think about the goals? And then they said, well, whatever you think is best because you're the expert. So am I going to run with that, or am I going to reshape the question and remind our clients and our families that this is their therapy, not my therapy? So you're constantly thinking about, how am I going to shift power imbalances because they're there? And then developing mutually beneficial partnerships with communities on behalf of individuals in defined populations. A lot of times we think about advocacy as us. If you were to visualize it, many times we might think of it as, I'm going to stand in front of my clients and I'm going to advocate for them. But true advocacy is when you have a platform and you use it so that voices that have been historically silenced or marginalized can be amplified. So when you're building partnerships with communities, not just at an individual client family level, but you're thinking about communities, then you want to have relationships that don't just benefit you and your entities and your goals, but you want those partnerships to be mutually beneficial. And then finally, my favorite part is advocating and maintaining institutional accountability or institutional consistency. And that just means, to what extent does the institution that I am a part of, does it align to social justice? Does it align to diversity, equity, inclusion? How is the institution I'm a part of facilitating or hindering my ability to be culturally responsive. So it can't just be your individual actions. It also has to be accountability at institutional levels. I think that one can be hard for people because it does require some reflection around the institutions you are a part of and historical reflection. So even if whatever our, like we can say ASHA being our institution, and we can talk about so many of the things that are going on now and how we are moving forward in terms of social justice, but we also have to think about historical inequity and what our field was founded on, and really do some reflection on how some of those ideologies permeate in our practices and our policies so we can challenge them. Also, in the last webinar, I talked about the journey to cultural humility, and I love this visual. I'm sure you've seen some version of it before with the equity, equality, difference, and also reality and liberation. So equality is giving every single person the same thing, but equity is giving people what they need based on who they are. So it has to be an acknowledgement of who they are and what they have. And cultural competency, the major flaw with cultural competency is that there is a risk for stereotyping. Also, it focuses on the clinician, their skills, their knowledge set, and it is very susceptible to othering. Also, there is no regard for intersectionality, which is this idea that we have lots of different identities. We're not just our race, we're not just our ethnicity, but we have lots of different identities that can be marginalized and privileged. And so that is not a part of the cultural competency framework. And then we also discuss the other-oriented nature of cultural humility, which is the ability to walk alongside your clients. And it also involves a pathway to social justice with the institutional accountability part. So today we are centering action-oriented cultural responsiveness, which says to your client, I hear you. What is cultural responsiveness? Cultural responsive teaching, that's where it comes from. So it comes from the education literature. Cultural responsive teaching is an approach that challenges educators to recognize, rather than deficits, that students bring strengths into the classroom that should be leveraged to make learning experiences relevant and effective for them. And that is from Dr. Gloria Ladson Billings, and that is her picture. This is a quote from her that I just love. It says that all instruction is culturally responsive, but the question is, to what culture is it currently oriented? And I love that because many times when we think about cultural responsiveness, we think, okay, I got to do this new thing. You're already doing something. You're actually already, we are in this country, in our field, we are already being culturally responsive to white supremacy culture and perfectionism and individualism and worship of the written word and all of these characteristics that are so prevalent in our field, we don't even think about it. And so a lot of times what we are doing is very countercultural if you are not maybe white, middle class, monolingual, you don't have a disability. And so what Ladson Billings continues, she says that educators who practice culturally responsive teaching set rigorous learning objectives for all of their students. So you are going to have high expectations of your students. You are going to be thinking from a strength-based perspective, and then you build bridges from what they're already bringing in, what they already know, the tools that their family already has, and you are building that bridge so that they can learn about who they are and also discover like what they really care about and what they're passionate about in their learning experiences. So you're weaving together rigor and relevance. You aren't necessarily taking it away. And so in our field, we can, in a simple way, we can just say being able to look at our client and taking their cultural perspectives, their beliefs, and their values, I would say not just into consideration, but centering that into every aspect of providing services, from the way that you communicate with them, the way that you build rapport with them, the way that you go about your assessments, the way that you set up your intervention, the way that you even talk about a prognosis and a diagnosis. Every single aspect of providing services, you can be culturally responsive. Another thing, and this is from Dr. Hyder and Salas Provance's textbook. If you were not aware, there is an amazing textbook written by them called Culturally Responsive Practices. It's linked to the handout for this presentation. I would say, I know you're probably like, if I'm a practicing SLP, what am I doing with the textbook? Y'all, it's good. It's good. That's all I have to say. Really consider getting it. It has taught me so much. Dr. Hyder has taught me so much on my journey in cultural responsiveness. The last thing I want to say is that cultural responsiveness is not linear. It is a product of our life experiences. So it's something that we can even bring into every interaction in our life, not just professionally. So culturally sustaining practices, this is going to be the newer terminology introduced by Paris, I think around 2017. And it's more of an anti-racist perspective around sustaining the cultures of people of color and sustaining cultural ways of knowing for communities of color. So there is going to be an acknowledgement of the power dynamics in schools, and then thinking about how we have historically had deficit approaches to understanding language and communication and literacy. And then we are looking at our communities of color as being deficient in their learning, when really we need to be centering historically and culturally responsive pedagogy in our schools. So in speech therapy, we should be centering the dynamic practices of our clients and communities of color in order to enact anti-racism and achieve equity and access. There's an article by Daniel and them et al. 2023, and they pose the question, what does it mean for education to exist and serve a pluralistic society absent of the white gaze? And in this question, they pose culturally responsive pedagogy being based on the idea that the experiences of students outside the school provide the foundation upon which students learn, making it necessary for teachers to incorporate their cultural and linguistic knowledge of racially, linguistically, and ethnically diverse students within their curriculum. So you cannot just bring in the same old raggedy old curriculum and materials, but you have to acknowledge who is sitting in front of you. And this is a radical shift because it is going to be an acknowledgement of systems, an acknowledgement of historical inequity. I think one thing that they talked about that can really resonate with us in our field is that it positions cultural and linguistic diversity as a strength and offers marginalized youth access to power because it recognizes that historically, white mainstream English and monoculturalism has been centered in schools. And so with that acknowledgement, we can give that power back by allowing them, by appreciating and then allowing them to bring their authentic selves into our educational spaces. Sorry, I went backwards instead of forward. So 2 decades ago, with Gloria Ladson Billings' term, it might be almost more than 2 decades ago, with her, when she introduced the term culturally relevant practices, pedagogy, and then culturally responsive pedagogy or teaching to describe a form of teaching that calls learners to, that calls for engaging learners in a way that centers their culture. And it's going to be very radical because we're not doing the same old thing, right? So I wanted to take her goals. She had 3 goals for culturally relevant teaching, and I kind of shifted them a little bit to address our field. So in our field, school-based speech language therapy should yield academic success. So it should impact someone's education and cultivate joy and belonging in the learning environment. Second, school-based speech language therapy should help students develop positive ethnic, linguistic, and cultural identities while simultaneously helping them to achieve academically. Third, school-based speech language therapy should support students' ability to recognize, understand, and critique current and social inequalities. One of the books that I'll link a little bit later when we get to our strategies is a book called Cultivating Genius by Dr. Gholdy Muhammad. It is a beautiful book. The sequel is Unearthing Joy, and those books have really impacted me in the way that I view speech therapy intervention. And in her framework of historically responsive pedagogy, she talks about the goals being intellectualism, identity, criticality, and then her second book is really centering the concept of joy. And I think those are things that we can also center in our intervention if we want to be culturally responsive. So let's do a little reflection here. We're thinking about equity and inclusion. And one of the strategic pathway objectives for ASHA is to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion within the association and in the discipline. Culturally responsive practices call for macro level service provision. Macro, what does that mean? It means your ability to work at the societal level, not just the individual family level. And no social change can be made individually. So we have to think about collaboration and systemic change. And that can be done when we enact the DEI framework. A little bit about what is DEI. I want to make the definitions very applicable to the work that we do. So diversity is just going to be representing the full range of assets in students' intersecting identities, ethnic ways of knowing, cultural beliefs, and value systems. There is always diversity, and diversity is never a goal. A goal should be inclusion and equity, because when inclusion and equity are present, diversity is a natural byproduct of that. And so the work is going to be with enacting inclusion and equity. And that is our work in regard to cultural responsiveness. So inclusion being including culturally and linguistically relevant tools, activities, materials, and content to strengthen identity development and foster a sense of belonging for the students you work with. And equity being providing access to meaningful, culturally responsive learning opportunities to ensure students achieve equitable academic outcomes and or looking back at history, repairing historic harm by returning and restoring resources that have been historically withheld. So let's reflect. To what extent do you reflect on inclusion, belonging, or representation when it comes to your therapy, your assessment, and your treatment? And what is something maybe you can do to shift that? The next question is about equity. So reflect on the extent to which you reflect on historic and current barriers to educational access and opportunities for your clients. This involves just thinking about your clients and their entire experience. And are there any barriers to them really just not only accessing their education, but actually finding joy in it, being able to relate, being able to have experiences that are equitable in my current role at Northeastern University, we just started the first SLP graduate program in Charlotte, North Carolina. Charlotte is a very big city, if you didn't know. And so it's just so interesting. There are many universities in the area. So it's very interesting that there are no SLP graduate programs, and we started the first one this year. So we have one cohort of graduate students, and we also have a pro bono clinic. So people in the community, it was very important for our clinic to be pro bono because we're thinking about equity, we're thinking about access, and really we're thinking about one of the things that I'm constantly reflecting on and reflecting with my students is what has been the impact to this community of not having a university with an SLP graduate program. Meaning, if you wanted to become an SLP, you had to go to another city if you were from Charlotte or live in that area. So that could be a barrier for some folks. And then also not having a university, not having a university clinic, maybe not having access to free services and what that looks like. So from the equity perspective, as it is such a joy to be able to be a part of a clinic that's providing free services, we have to constantly reflect on the social determinants of health and what are the barriers for our clients, even accessing our free services. So thinking about our materials and being translated, and are we offering teletherapy and the times that we offer, and representation. There's so many things in terms of access and opportunities that we can constantly reflect on when we're thinking about cultural responsiveness. So what I want us to do finally is we are going to talk about some practical strategies for centering cultural responsiveness. And I made a handout for you all. It is in the chat. So there'll be a little bit more, I guess it's similar information in the handout, but just kind of more parsed out. So ART, just like the Tyler song, the acronym we're going to use is A stands for authentic practices, R stands for rapport generators, and T stands for truth and truth telling. So those are going to be some of the things that we center. Am I going to talk about this? I'm just going to go through these, and then I'm going to go through, give you like some examples of things that I have used and things that have been great resources in my journey in cultural responsiveness. So authentic practices. Number one, strategy. Strategy number one, in order to enact cultural responsiveness in assessment, you should utilize least bias assessment tools and approaches. So as many of you know, the gold standard in our field is standardized assessments, to the extent that many times you work in places where it is, they say that it is required for you to provide a standardized score. And this is a huge barrier in terms of equity, because it is our responsibility to provide ethical evaluations. And if we are giving standardized assessments to students who are not included in those norm populations, usually these are our culturally and linguistically diverse, our historically marginalized students, our students who are speak more than one language or speak non-mainstream dialects, then we are giving them bias assessment tools and approaches. And so we don't want to do that. We want to center dynamic assessment. Why? Because there's so much research that says it is least biased for everyone, not just CLD clients, but everyone. Also, we want to utilize criterion reference assessments, because norm reference assessments compare people to other people, but criterion reference assessments just acknowledge to what extent have you gained a skill? Do you have a skill area or a deficit in that area? And then maybe identifying areas for growth. Narrative assessments are also culturally responsive, and non-linguistic processing tasks like non-word repetition can be culturally responsive ways to assess. So if we want our assessments to be authentic, we have to uproot the bias in the practice. Another way to be authentic, but this is in terms of treatment, is to create and use high quality representative materials that boost identity development, celebrate our clients' heritage languages, not just centering English, teach culturally relevant skills, so skills that are relevant to who they are, how they see the world, and provide opportunities to develop criticality. So that is that ability to look at the world and make decisions and see yourself as someone who can be a part of social justice and enacting that in your own world. So our third strategy in terms of rapport is a huge part of being culturally responsive. How do you generate that? You can enact cultural responsiveness in your assessments by building rapport and cultivating trust before you do an assessment. And the way to do that is through ethnographic interviewing. So making it your mission to not assess people without getting to know them first, getting to know what brings them in, what has their experience been before going about an assessment. Also learning about their cultural background, their language background, who they are as a person, and then deciding what you're going to do as a part of your assessment. Another way to generate rapport, but this way is in treatment, is to really think about building, repairing, and maintaining your therapeutic relationships and measuring how strong your relationships are with your clients and how effective those relationships are by seeking ongoing feedback. And that can be conversations, that can be rating scales, surveys, interviews. There's so many different ways to assess your therapeutic relationships. And shameless plug, my next presentation, I believe, is going to be in this series in December, is going to be focused on therapeutic relationships. Yay, my favorite topic. And one of my favorite topics, because these are all my favorite topics. And then finally, truth and truth telling. So going back to James Baldwin, thinking about not only self-reflection, but also institutional accountability and reflecting on institutions, we can enact cultural responsiveness by making a commitment to the journey of diversity, equity, and inclusion, by acknowledging historical inequities and exclusion in our speech language practices, and engaging in advocacy in disrupting all isms. Some include ableism, racism, linguicism, capitalism, colonialism at personal, interpersonal, and institutional levels. So let's break these down. For authentic practices, what are some things that I love? I hope you have heard of the Leaders Project. That is probably my go-to place in terms of dynamic assessment. On the bottom left, you'll see the school age language assessment measures, or SLAM. These are cards. They have them virtually as well, and you can use them as a least bias assessment tool. You can collect language samples. You can look at problem solving, theory of mind. There's different ages. There also have been translated to multiple languages. This is a great example of a dynamic assessment. Dynamic assessment is not a thing that you go get out of a closet. It is a framework. And that framework uses where you test, then you teach, then you retest. That is the model. So instead of just saying, oh, wow, they did so bad on that assessment, you don't know. Maybe they didn't understand what you were doing. Maybe they have never done that before. Maybe just a little bit of mediation and a little bit of teaching, they will be able to do better. And so maybe you might be doing a standardized assessment, but you modify it. You don't report the scores. You give them extra time. Maybe you repeat questions you aren't supposed to repeat. Maybe you score it in a way that honors their native language. Then you might take an area of weakness in a standardized assessment and you might say, hey, let's do some dynamic assessment. Let's teach them and then see if they can do better. Let's see how they respond in terms of their learning. Do they respond to cues? Do they respond to prompts? Do they respond to extra time? So I love the Leaders Project. They have so many resources, not just the slam cards. They also have fast mapping, which is a type of dynamic assessment for vocabulary. And that is with young children. They also have non-word repetition tests that you can give. And that is an example of a non-linguistic processing task. It's translated to lots of different languages. In the middle here, this difference versus disorder. This is also a book that has been incredibly helpful. And it has so many different languages. It is by Bilinguistics, so another great tool website that you can use. And it's going to give you characteristics of all these different languages. In fact, my students right now, so after this, I'll be grading. My students in my articulation and phonology class are doing an assignment where they use a chapter from this book, the Mandarin chapter, they were given a sample of a little girl who may or may not have a phonological disorder, and her Mandarin is her native language. So they're looking at the Venn diagram. They're seeing what are the sounds that we have in English, what are the sounds in Mandarin, what are the shared sounds, and if she does produce errors, are they the shared sounds or are they just sounds that they don't even have in Mandarin? Because that doesn't mean she doesn't know. It doesn't mean she has a speech disorder. It just means that she's learning English. So this has been a very helpful book. Going towards the right, here are lots of lovely books that will help celebrate clients' heritage languages and cultures. I love Dreamers. I could talk about all these books, but I really enjoyed Maya's Book Nook. This was created by Dr. Lakeisha Johnson out in Florida and her daughter. And there are so many resources on finding inclusive books through her website and through the work that she has done. And then at the far right, you will see Cultivating Genius, which is a great book. It focuses on literacy, but I have used it as a framework for like speech therapy in general. So intervention and making that historically and culturally responsive. For rapport generators, I think this is something that we think about, but maybe we don't think about it in like a practical way or in a way that, wow, you could actually measure this. Why, yes, you can. So to the right, you will see this article. I just got notified that it came out recently. There was an article about therapeutic relationships and working with people with aphasia. And the authors created a therapeutic alliance reflection checklist. And I think the questions are great for any diagnosis area, but this is a more structured way of measuring your therapeutic relationship. Right on top of that, to the far right, you'll see these pictures. This was actually created by a student of mine a couple years ago in my therapeutic relationships course. And it is like a visual way, a fun way where you could measure the therapeutic relationship with child clients. So having questions like, do you think your therapist makes speech fun? Do you try your hardest? Do you think this helps you in school? Do you enjoy going to speech? And then rating it using Bitmojis. On the left, you will have some materials that I have used when thinking about ethnographic interviews. Many times with ethnographic interviews, what kind of like scares people is that there isn't a protocol because there isn't like a survey or you don't download it, you create it. It is iterative. So you don't go in with knowing every single question you're going to ask. It is something that is developed where you can be partially prepared, but the goal and the foundation of ethnographic interviewing is the way that you ask questions. So asking the right questions in the right ways. That's an ASHA Leader article by Westby, and they talk about you want to ask open-ended questions. You want to start with very broad questions and let your clients tell you what they want you to know, and then you start to filter in and ask more specific questions or descriptive questions. And then another article that can help you in your journey to learning about ethnographic interviewing is by my friend, Dr. Kimberly Jenkins, and also Dr. Raul Rojas, that talks about cultural competence from a funds of knowledge framework. So thinking about ethnographic interviewing, but also this place, a strength-based place when we're thinking about our clients and our families. And then with truth and truth telling, I think the best thing you can do to make a commitment in your journey towards diversity, equity, and inclusion is to keep on learning. So I'm a member of ASHA SIG 14, and when you're a member of that, you have access to not only journal articles, every once in a while we have really great professional developments in the area of cultural and linguistic diversity. So that can be a resource for you if you want to be a part of a SIG or if you are an ASHA member. Also, I am one of the co-chairs of the National Black Association of Speech, Language, and Hearing, and co-chair of their Cultural Humility Task Force, And with our Cultural Humility Task Force, we have two really big things that are going on every year. The first being our Cultural Humility Conference. That is a one-day virtual conference in the fall. And then we have a Cultural Humility Ambassador program that is more of a 9-month program to learn in depth about cultural humility, and you can earn up to 24 CEUs in that program. Also, you might want to consider advocacy at more of a structural, political level. And so ASHA does have the Committee of Ambassadors, and I was the representative when I lived in Minnesota, and they participate when you go to the Capitol for Capitol Day, and you can do lobbying and advocacy work in that area. Also, I am a contributor to, or maybe this is my business, so not really contributing, to Literacy, Language, and Liberation, where we offer professional learning opportunities for those who want to dig deep in their equity work. And my colleague, Dr. Mahold, and I are presenting at ASHA, so you can check us out if you will be there. We're talking about equity and justice more so in higher ed at our academic program level, but all are welcome to attend. So I just say here, don't fake DEI till you make it, people. I know we have a DEI requirement in terms of our professional education, but I want you to maybe take it a step beyond that. Really do some self-reflection on areas that you want to work on and develop, and make a commitment to learning, to reading books, to listening to podcasts, to being a part of communities to continue your journey.